I've been sleeping next to my husband for 3 years, cooking his meals, kissing him goodnight, raising our daughter together. Last week, I found his death certificate. My name is Catherine Morrison, and I'm about to tell you the most terrifying truth I've ever discovered. This isn't a ghost story or about spirits or hauntings. This is about something far worse. Something that walks and talks and smiles at you across the breakfast table. Something that remembers your wedding day and your daughter's first words and the way you like your coffee. Something that feels warm when you touch it and bleeds when you cut it. But here's what you need to understand. My husband, David Morrison, died in a car accident on October 14th, 2021. I was at his funeral. I scattered his ashes in Mirror Lake where we got married. I mourned him for exactly 1 year. And then on October 14th, 2022, exactly 1 year to the day after his death, he came home. He walked through our front door at 6:15 in the evening, kissed me on the forehead, and asked what was for dinner. And I, Catherine Morrison, loving wife and devoted mother, welcomed him back with open arms because grief does terrible things to your mind. Because I wanted so desperately to believe. Because the alternative was too horrifying to consider. But 3 years later, I can't deny it anymore. The man in my house isn't David. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the day my husband died, and then to the day he came back. October 14th, 2021 was a Tuesday, and David left work at 9:47 p.m. I know the exact time because his last text to me was time-stamped. Leaving now, love you, kiss Emma for me. The accident happened on Highway 41, about 15 miles from our house, when a drunk driver crossed the median at 70 miles per hour, crushing David's car like a tin can. The police said he died instantly, that he didn't suffer, but those words haunted me as I became a 34-year-old widow with a 6-year-old daughter who kept asking when daddy was coming home. The funeral was closed casket. They said the damage was too severe, so we cremated him. And on a cold November morning, I stood at the edge of Mirror Lake with Emma's small hand in mine and poured my husband's ashes into the water, watching them disappear beneath the surface, gray dust dissolving into darkness, thinking this is goodbye forever. I was wrong. The first year after David's death was a blur of grief counseling and antidepressants, and Emma's night terrors. She was only 6 and didn't understand why daddy wasn't coming home, and neither did I really. Because death is an abstract concept until you're the one sorting through someone's clothes and deciding what to keep and what to donate and what to burn, because you can't stand the smell of their cologne anymore. I kept his wedding ring, his watch, the stupid novelty mug Emma bought him that said "World's okay as dad." Everything else went to Goodwill or the trash. I had to move forward, that's what everyone told me, as if grief is a linear path, as if you can just walk away from a crater in your life and not look back. But I tried, God, I tried. I went back to work at the library, enrolled Emma in therapy, even started dating again with awkward coffee meetings with men who weren't David and would never be David. I was healing, or at least pretending to heal. And then October 14th, 2022 arrived, the anniversary of David's death. I'd taken the day off work, Emma was at school, and I was alone in the house sitting in David's old armchair, looking through photo albums, crying in that ugly, snotty way you only cry when no one's watching. That's when I heard the key in the lock. At first, I thought it was my mother. She had a spare key and had been checking on me more frequently, but the footsteps were wrong. Too heavy, too familiar. And then I heard his voice, "Kat, I'm home. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was insane." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing because that was David's voice, David's exact inflection. The nickname only he used, Kat, not Catherine, not Kath, just Kat. I stood up, the photo album sliding off my lap with pictures of our wedding scattering across the floor, and walked to the living room doorway on legs that didn't feel like mine. And there he was, standing in the entryway, taking off his jacket, loosening his tie, looking exactly, precisely, perfectly like my dead husband. Same brown eyes, same crooked smile, same small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood bike accident, same everything. He looked at me and his smile widened. Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. I think I screamed, or maybe I fainted. The next thing I remember clearly is sitting on the couch with David's arms around me, his hand rubbing circles on my back the way he always did when I was upset, his voice soft in my ear, telling me it was okay, I was okay, everything was okay. But nothing was okay, nothing made sense. My husband was dead. I'd watched his ashes sink into Mirror Lake, and yet here he was, solid and real and warm, smelling like his cologne, his heart beating against my ear as I pressed my face into his chest. How? How are you here? You died, David. You died. I was at your funeral. I scattered your ashes. He looked at me with such genuine concern, such authentic confusion. What? Kat, what are you talking about? I think you had a nightmare, a really bad one. Come on, let's get you some water. He led me to the kitchen like I was a child, poured me water, sat across from me at the table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together, and looked at me with such genuine concern that I started to doubt my own memory. Had I imagined the accident? Had I had some kind of psychotic break? Was this real and the last year just a grief-induced delusion? That's what I told myself for the next 3 years, that I'd been sick, that the grief had broken something in my brain, that David had never died at all. It was easier to believe I was crazy than to believe what was actually happening. But the truth has a way of surfacing even when you bury it deep, even when you're terrified of what you'll find. For the first few months after David came back, I was too grateful to question it. I had my husband again. Emma had her father. We were a family. That's all that mattered, right? But then I started noticing things, small things, tiny inconsistencies that I brushed aside at first because I didn't want to see them. David didn't remember our anniversary, not the big one, our wedding anniversary. He remembered that fine, but he forgot the anniversary of our first date, the date that meant more to me than almost anything because David had spent 6 months planning it, taking me to this tiny Italian restaurant in the city where he'd arranged for them to play our song. I mentioned it one night over dinner. Remember when you took me to Giordano's? And David looked at me blankly. Giordano's? Doesn't ring a bell. Are you sure that was us? When I insisted, of course, I was sure. It was our first date. He'd planned it for months. He just smiled apologetically. Huh, must be the accident. I think I have some gaps in my memory. The accident, he referenced it sometimes, this mysterious accident he claimed had happened while I was having my episode. And according to David's version of events, he'd been in a minor car crash the same week I'd apparently had a mental breakdown and imagined his death. Convenient, wasn't it? An explanation for any inconsistencies, a reason he might not remember certain things. Except David couldn't tell me where this accident had happened, or which hospital had treated him, or why there were no medical bills or insurance claims. And when I pressed him on it, he got irritable. Why are you interrogating me, Catherine? I'm here. I'm alive. Isn't that enough? And I backed down because he was right, wasn't he? He was here. He was alive. Who cares if he forgot one date? Except it wasn't just one date. He forgot Emma's peanut allergy. I caught him making her a peanut butter sandwich one afternoon and had to snatch it away, reminding him that Emma could die if she ate that. He apologized profusely, blamed the memory gaps again. But David had been there when Emma had her first allergic reaction at age 3, had been the one to stab the EpiPen into her leg, while I called 911, had been the one who threw out every jar of peanut butter in the house and started obsessively reading food labels. That wasn't something you forget, not if you're really the parent of that child. Then there were the tactile things, the way he touched me. David had always been affectionate, but in specific ways. He traced patterns on my back while we watched TV, tucked my hair behind my ear when I was reading, hold my hand with our fingers interlaced, never just palm to palm. The man who came back did none of these things. His touch was generic, appropriate but impersonal, like he'd studied how married couples behave but didn't quite have the muscle memory. I told myself I was being paranoid, that trauma changes people, that maybe the accident had affected him in ways I didn't understand. But then there was the incident with the mirror. We have this huge antique mirror in our bedroom, a wedding gift from David's grandmother that David loved. He used to joke it was the only family heirloom worth keeping. One morning, about a year after he came back, I caught him staring at it, not at his reflection, but at the mirror itself. His face inches from the glass, absolutely still, not breathing, not blinking, just staring. I watched him for a full 2 minutes before I said his name, and when he finally turned to look at me, his expression was wrong, empty, like a computer program that had frozen mid-task. Then he blinked, and the David smile was back. Sorry, zoned out for a second. You ready for breakfast? I didn't ask what he'd been doing because I didn't want to know. That was the moment I realized deep in my gut, where instinct lives, that something was profoundly wrong. But I still didn't have proof, still didn't have evidence, still couldn't articulate what I was feeling without sounding insane. How do you explain to someone that your husband doesn't feel like your husband anymore? That he looks right and sounds right, but something essential is missing? That when he touches you, you feel nothing but cold dread? You can't, not without evidence. So I started looking for it. I began with his office. David had a home office where he did his architectural work, and I'd barely been in there since he came back, respecting his privacy, his space. But one afternoon, while he was out picking up Emma from soccer practice, I went in. His desk was immaculate, too immaculate. David had been organized, but lived in organized, with coffee rings on papers, pencil shavings in corners, sticky notes everywhere. This desk looked like a stage set, perfect and untouched. I turned on his computer, no password. And David had always been paranoid about password security, had different passwords for everything and changed them monthly. But this computer had no password at all. And when I opened his files, they were empty. Not literally empty. There were folders labeled with client names and project titles. But when I opened them, the documents inside were gibberish. Lorem ipsum placeholder text, random strings of numbers, architectural drawings that made no spatial sense, rooms that couldn't exist, staircases that led to nowhere. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I heard the garage door opening. I shut down the computer and got out of there, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd have a heart attack right there on the stairs. That night at dinner, I watched David, really watched him, the way he cut his food, the way he chewed, the way he looked at Emma. And I realized he was performing. Every gesture was slightly too precise. Every smile lasted exactly the right amount of time. Every response was appropriate but scripted. He was mimicking humanity, and he was very, very good at it, but he wasn't perfect, and I was going to prove it. I couldn't go to the police. What would I say? My husband, who died 3 years ago, came back and I think he's an imposter. They'd send me to a psychiatric ward. I couldn't tell my mother or my friends because they all thought I had had a breakdown after David's death and that his return had healed me. So if I started questioning his identity now, they'd assume I was relapsing. I was completely alone with this knowledge, this terrible growing certainty that the man in my house wasn't my husband. So I did what any desperate person would do. I started documenting everything. I bought a small notebook that I kept hidden in my car, and every day I'd write down the inconsistencies, the forgotten memories, the strange behaviors, the moments when David didn't seem quite human. The list grew quickly. He never slept. I mean, truly never. I started pretending to be asleep and watching him through half-closed eyes, and he'd lie perfectly still beside me for exactly 7 hours, eyes closed, chest rising and falling in a regular rhythm. But he never moved, never shifted positions, never snored or talked in his sleep, or got up to use the bathroom. At exactly 6 a.m., his eyes would open and he'd get out of bed like someone had flipped a switch. He didn't eat, not really. He'd put food in his mouth, chew, swallow. But I started monitoring the groceries, and we were going through half the amount of food we used to. He was eating enough to look normal in front of Emma and me, but when he was alone, he didn't eat at all. I found sandwiches he'd claimed to have eaten, hidden in the trash, untouched. He never got sick, not once in 3 years. No colds, no flu, no headaches or backaches or any of the minor ailments that plague normal humans. His body was constant, unchanging, like a wax figure. And his eyes, God, his eyes. Sometimes when he didn't know I was looking, his eyes would go completely dead, empty, like a doll's eyes. Then someone would enter the room and they'd light up again, animated and human and full of false warmth. But the worst thing, the thing that made me absolutely certain I was living with something inhuman, happened 3 months ago when Emma fell off her bike. Bad fall, broke her arm. There was blood and screaming, and I was panicking, trying to get her to the car to go to the emergency room. And David just stood there. For 5 full seconds, he stood completely still, staring at Emma's blood like he'd never seen blood before. Then his face did this thing, this horrible thing where it was like someone was downloading the appropriate emotional response. His expression shifted through several different configurations before settling on the concerned parent. It took him 5 seconds to remember how to act human. Emma didn't notice because she was in too much pain, but I noticed. And that's when I knew for certain whatever was wearing David's face had to study us to learn how to respond. It wasn't instinctive, it wasn't natural, it was learned behavior. I started researching late at night after David and Emma were in bed, sitting in my car in the driveway with my laptop, searching. At first, I looked up mundane explanations like brain injuries, personality changes after trauma, dissociative disorders, but none of it fit because David didn't have gaps in his memory. He had replaced memories, false ones that contradicted documented reality. Then I went darker. Doppelgangers, changelings, body snatchers, folklore and mythology and urban legends about things that replace people, things that look human but aren't, things that slip into your life and take over while you're too grief-stricken to notice. That's when I found the forums, small obscure corners of the internet where people shared stories like mine, people who swore their loved ones had been replaced, people who documented the same inconsistencies I'd seen, and people who'd tried to prove it and ended up in psychiatric hospitals or worse. There was one story that made my blood run cold. A woman in Oregon who'd become convinced her husband was replaced after he died in a work accident. And she tried to prove it by showing people his death certificate that she'd found in county records, undeniable documentation that her husband had died. When she showed it to her husband, he'd smiled at her and said, "That's not me, honey. That's someone with the same name. Common mistake." Then he'd committed her to a mental institution. The woman, Sarah, had managed to post her story from the hospital before she disappeared from the internet entirely, and her final post was a warning. Don't let them know you know. Once they realize you see them, they'll make you disappear. They'll say you're crazy and everyone will believe them because they're so good at being human, better than human, perfect. If you think your loved one has been replaced, smile and pretend you don't notice. Then run, get as far away as you can because whatever they don't let go easily. I should have run then, should have grabbed Emma and disappeared in the middle of the night. But I needed proof, something concrete, something that would make people believe me when I took my daughter and ran, something that would protect us legally and financially and physically from whatever was living in my house. So I decided to find David's death certificate. If I could prove he died, really died, officially died, maybe someone would listen to me. Maybe a lawyer or a police officer or someone with authority would look at the evidence and see what I saw. I waited until David took Emma to a birthday party, told him I had a migraine and needed to stay home. He bought it. Why wouldn't he? I'd been playing the role of trusting wife for 3 years. As soon as they left, I drove to the county clerk's office and requested a copy of the death certificate for David Morrison. died October 14th, 2021. The clerk, a bored woman in her 50s, typed for a minute, frowned, typed some more, then said, "That's strange. We have the record, but it's been marked as clerical error. Says here the death was erroneously reported." I said desperately, "What? No, he died. There was an accident, a funeral. I have photos." But she was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. According to our records, David Morrison is alive. The death certificate was voided 2 years ago. It happens sometimes, mix-ups with similar names, false reports. But there's a notation here that Mr. Morrison himself came in to have the error corrected. He'd erased his own death. Somehow, the thing wearing David's face had gone into official records and made his death disappear like it never happened. I drove home in a daze, sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, trying to figure out what to do next. And that's when I saw it through the living room window. David was home early, and he was standing perfectly still in the middle of the room, facing the wall, just standing there, not moving, not breathing, like a computer in sleep mode, waiting for us to come home so he could turn back on, so he could be David again. I sat in that car and realized I'd been living with this thing for 3 years, sleeping next to it, letting it touch my daughter, letting it into every intimate corner of our lives, and I had no idea what it wanted, no idea what it really was, no idea what it would do if it knew that I knew. So I did what Sarah from Oregon told me to do. I smiled, I walked into that house, and I pretended everything was normal, pretended I hadn't seen him standing there like a mannequin, pretended I still believed he was David, and I started planning our escape. The hardest part about living with a monster is pretending you don't know it's a monster. Every morning I had to wake up next to it. Every evening I had to sit across from it at dinner. Every night I had to kiss it goodnight and ignore the wrongness of its skin against mine. And I had to do all of this while secretly planning how to get Emma and myself out alive. I started withdrawing cash in small amounts, nothing that would trigger alerts or seem suspicious. $50 here, 75 there, hiding it in a shoebox under old sweaters in the back of my closet. I renewed our passports, told David we might take a vacation, and he smiled that empty smile and said it sounded nice. I researched towns in other states, places with good schools for Emma, places where we could disappear. I contacted a lawyer about divorce, pretending I just needed general information. I was building an exit strategy, but the thing in my house was building something too. David, or whatever was wearing his face, started asking strange questions, personal, invasive questions. "Tell me about your childhood. I feel like I don't remember all the stories." And "What's your earliest memory? Describe it in detail. And what would you do if something happened to me? Really happened? Would you be okay?" At first, I thought he was testing me, seeing if I still believed he was David. But then I realized something worse. He was collecting information, learning, studying us more deeply, like he was preparing for something. And Emma, God, Emma, he started spending more time with her, taking her on special outings, just the two of them. And I couldn't stop it without raising suspicions. Couldn't explain why I didn't want my daughter alone with her father. So I had to let her go, had to watch them drive away together, had to wait in agony until they came home, checking Emma for signs of what? I didn't even know what I was looking for. But Emma seemed fine, better than fine. She adored David more than ever, would come home from their outings glowing, talking about how Daddy was the best, how he understood her better than anyone, how she wished they could spend more time together. It was wrong the way she said it was wrong, too emphatic, too insistent, like she was reading from a script. That's when I realized he wasn't just studying us, he was converting us, starting with Emma, making her more like him, less human, more empty. I had to act fast. I had almost enough money saved. I had a lawyer on standby. I had identified a small town in Montana where we could hide. I just needed one more piece of evidence, something I could take to the authorities that would make them understand this wasn't a custody dispute or a divorce. This was a survival situation. So I did something reckless, something stupid. I set up a hidden camera in our bedroom, just a small one disguised as a phone charger on my nightstand. I needed to catch David in his unguarded moments, needed video evidence of him standing motionless for hours or staring at his reflection like he was studying a foreign species. For 3 nights, I recorded. For 3 nights, I lay perfectly still, pretending to sleep, while the camera captured everything. On the fourth night, I reviewed the footage on my laptop in my car, and then what I saw made me want to vomit. The thing that looked like David would wait until I was deeply asleep. Then it would sit up in bed and stare at me for hours, just staring, watching me sleep with those empty, calculating eyes. Sometimes it would reach out and almost touch my face, its hand hovering inches from my skin, like it was studying me, learning the contours of my features. Then at 5:55 a.m., exactly 5 minutes before I usually woke up, it would lie back down and pretend to sleep. I watched all 3 nights of footage, same behavior every time, mechanical, precise, inhuman. I had my proof, but proof wasn't enough. Because that night when I came home from watching the videos, David was waiting in the kitchen, standing in the dark. He turned on the light when I walked in. "You've been spending a lot of time in your car lately." I tried to sound normal. "Just needed some quiet time. You know how work has been stressful." He took a step closer. "You seem different, Kat, distant, like you're hiding something." Then another step, and his movements were wrong, too fluid, like he was gliding rather than walking. "Are you afraid of me?" I lied. "No, of course not. Why would you ask that?" He tilted his head at an angle that no human neck should bend, studied me like I was a specimen under glass. "You found something, didn't you? Something that made you question." I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He knew, somehow he knew. His voice became soft, almost sad. "I've been good to you, good to Emma. I've been exactly what you needed. Better than the original, if I'm honest. No flaws, no mistakes, no human weaknesses. And this is how you repay me? With suspicion?" I barely whispered. "Who are you?" There was a long, terrible silence. Then he smiled, and it wasn't David's smile. It was something else. Something that had learned to arrange a human face into an approximation of joy, but didn't understand what joy meant. His voice changed, became layered, wrong. "I'm whatever you need me to be. That's the point. I'm better than David. More patient, more attentive, more perfect. David was weak. He died in that accident like humans do, fragile and temporary. But I don't die. I don't leave. I don't disappoint. I'm the answer to your grief, Catherine. I'm the miracle you prayed for." Horror dawned. "You're not him. You're not David." Matter of factly, I'm better than David. I have all his memories, all his love for you, but none of his limitations. I came because you called for him, because your grief was so powerful, it opened the door, and I walked through. I put on his face, and I've lived his life, and I've loved you the way he would have if death hadn't taken him. You should be grateful. I ran, didn't think, didn't plan, just ran up the stairs into Emma's room, scooped her out of bed while she was still half asleep. She was crying, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't explain, couldn't stop to comfort her. Just grabbed my car keys and ran. The David thing didn't chase us. It stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching us go with the terrible smile. "You can't leave, Catherine. Where would you go? Who would believe you? And even if you run, I'll find you. I'll always find you. Because I'm part of you now, part of your family, part of your grief." I got Emma into the car, started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. Emma was sobbing in the back seat, asking where we were going, why we were leaving Daddy, and I looked in the rearview mirror. The David thing was standing in the doorway watching us, not moving, just watching. And I knew even as I drove away, speeding down streets I'd driven 1,000 times, heading for the highway, heading anywhere but here, I knew it was telling the truth. I couldn't outrun it because whatever it was, wherever it came from, it had come because I'd wanted it. My grief had been the invitation. My desperate wish for David to come back had opened a door in reality, and something had answered. Something that wore his face and spoke with his voice and knew how to pretend to be human but wasn't, would never be, and would never let us go. We drove for 6 hours straight until we ended up in a motel outside of Denver, cheap and anonymous, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions if you pay cash. I'm recording this now while Emma sleeps, leaving this testimony in case something happens to us, in case the thing finds us again. If you're listening to this, if you've lost someone you loved and you're praying for them to come back, beware what answers your prayers. Because sometimes the things that come back aren't what we lost. They're just things that learn to wear the faces of the dead. And they're so much better at being human than humans ever were. That's what makes them so terrifying. My husband died 4 years ago, and I need to finally accept that and let him go because the thing I've been living with, the thing I've been calling David, isn't him and never was. It's something that fed on my grief and took root in my life. And now I don't know if I'll ever be free of it, but I'm going to try. For Emma, for myself, for the memory of the real David who died on that highway and never came back. The rest is just a monster wearing his face. And monsters, no matter how human they look, no matter how perfectly they smile, no matter how much they claim to love you, are still monsters. Remember that. I remember that when you're grieving, when you're desperate, when you're praying for miracles, because sometimes what comes back is worse than the loss itself. This is Catherine Morrison. If you're listening to this, learn from my mistake. When someone you love dies, let them stay dead. Because the alternative, the thing that might come back wearing their face, is a horror you can't imagine until you're living it. And by then, it's already too late.